So if you're at all having problems with your Harley Touring ignition, hopefully this video will serve you well, because we have a situation right here and it's something we're gonna have to work through. So as you can see behind me, the boom box is lit, so technically the bike is in the accessory position, but the ignition switch is in the off position. So the bike won't go off right now, and this sounds good, it feels pretty good, but the forks won't lock in the lock position either, so stuck in accessory. So if you're just looking for a video on how to remove the ignition switch, there is a proper way to do that. We've had a video out for a long time on that. I will link to it in the description below. Try to put a card on the screen for you. And I'll probably go over it again in this video. Welcome back, Bikeaholics. Ryan Urlacher here, lawabidingbiker.com. I always thank you for checking back in. And so what happens if you get in a hurry or you don't do it exactly right? Well, you can end up with this issue, and it's basically an alignment problem. There's a shaft that goes down from the ignition switch, and there's detents down in there, and everything has to be lined up, and clearly it is not. So you say, well, why not just pull the ignition switch and shaft? That would be a good idea, and then you can work on maybe aligning everything down in there. However, this one, because it's not aligned, the shaft is stuck in there, so this ignition switch won't even come off. Now, I really like to work on bikes on lifts, but in this case, it'll be beneficial to do it on the kickstand. The reason is this lower dash panel, if you are on a lift and your wheel is straight, especially because we can't get the ignition off, you're gonna have troubles. You won't be able to get the lower dash panel off because it'll run into the tank dash panel. While it's on its kickstand, we can actually turn the bars, and thus allowing us to remove that lower dash panel to get access to the ignition. So would you come in a little closer, and we'll expose the ignition. Oh, real quick, I'm gonna remove the main fuse from the left side under the cover at the fuse block. Okay, so these lower dash panels are very easy to get out. Just a Torx 27 on the head of this bolt. Just one on each side is how easy this is. Okay, both bolts removed off the lower dash panel, and again, that's why we don't have it on a lift with the wheel straight, because you would run into the problem of pulling this back and it would just get hung up and you wouldn't be able to get it out against this. So because we can turn the bars, we can actually move this out of the way. Now be aware, behind here, there are two plugs. They're deadhead plugs, and they're connected to this, and they're just the standard push and pull type plugs. I'll show those to you. I'm just unplugging them. All right, now we can turn our bars and work this out. And there's the two deadheaded plugs that just connect to the back of this lower housing. So this is your whole ignition here exposed, and it looks like we have a electrical plug. On front and back, it's got these tabs, so with a screwdriver I'm popping the back one. Hopefully with my thumb I can get this one, and we'll give it a little pull here and disconnected. So down to the front of this ignition switch, this is a 5/32 hex head T-handle. There's one there, and then one on this side. So it looks like I'll be able to get in here and start backing these out. All right, looks like I got this one out here. And I'll just kind of let it sit there for now, and I'll move over to this side and just finish on that side. And there we go. Our ignition is off. So on the back side of the ignition are two screws, very small Torx, looks like a T10. I'm gonna go ahead and back both those out. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and slide this up. And that just fits, that little blade there fits right down in there. We're just sliding it out. And so there you go. That is what the inside of these look like. A pin and a spring there, and another pin down here that pushes kind of up and down. And I see that there's a metal nipple here, and I'm just going to get this tool in here and see if I can move this all the way over and see if this will free up the ignition so it's all the way over now. Okay, so mine was all jammed up, and I could actually see this shaft, the bottom of the ignition switch shaft here. It was actually sticking down. You can see there's a kind of a metal barrel down here. It shouldn't be as low as it was, which is why this whole thing was sucked down. And I basically just kind of fought with it and turned it back and forth. I was able to pull this electrical component. You can kind of slide it out to the side there, and I was able to pop it out. And really, you just have to have a little patience and keep manipulating stuff, because again, mine was actually stuck in there. And so because there's three different protrusions on this shaft, there's really three different components within this ignition. And those are the different parts that we have to get lined up. Okay, in order to get the different components out of here, we got to start down here at the bottom. And there's basically a pin that goes back through the barrel, which has some cutouts in it. And basically this spring is just in a cup down here. All right, it's very simple. I'm just going to pull that, and actually I'll do it this way so you can kind of see. Is just pull that spring off the end of the shaft, and then you can just lift the bottom of the spring out of that little cup. And then we can actually take the shaft itself, or the pin itself I should say, and remove it. Again, it just goes back in there. And then we have this part too, which the pin was going through. Of course, the spring was in front, but it goes right back through that. And this, be careful, because when we push this down, there is a spring-loaded button basically down in there. And so I'm going to put my finger over that. I'm pushing down on this, and I can feel it. And it is a very tiny spring, and you will lose it if you don't put your thumb over that. So be very careful. Now that I got it in there, it's not going to fly out on me, and I'll go ahead and take that out. And I'm coming out with that, and you can see how tiny that is. All right, so now we've opened it up, and there's nothing holding really that barrel. This is our actual electrical ignition portion in here, and you can go ahead and rock that out. Now the barrel's going to come out with it here. There's also a kind of like a spring washer up here. I forget exactly what they call them, but I'll show you. So you can see right there, the barrel's coming out, everything, and we can pull that whole ignition. This was the washer that was actually sits on top of there. So just make sure we do that when we're going back in. And of course, that's the barrel kind of the metal barrel I've been talking about there. It only goes one way, and it lines up right in the bottom of there. And so that's how we basically took that out there. And last is this portion right here. And you can see I'm sliding it out, just slides right out. Now, I'm going to talk about each of these in a moment, but you can see there, that is our ignition. So all the components, there's nothing left in there. These are all the components that we already have out that we're going to have to line up. So the first portion, of course, came right in there. I want you to be really careful with this part, and the reason is you can probably see that there's 2 ball bearings up in there, and this plate will pop off, and there's springs holding those ball bearings in, and this thing can, if you lift that out, it can pop all over. So let me show you real quick. I'm going to be real careful while I do this, very methodically, just so I can show you. There, you see one pop there. So there's one ball bearing that came out of there, and I did it very carefully, but I at least wanted to show you. And you'll see another ball bearing in there. All right, and then on the end here, both is a spring there and a spring there. So that's the stuff you really don't want to lose. And the way you get this back into place, if it does pop out, is put your spring right on that ball bearing on that side. I'll find my other ball bearing and put it right on that spring, and then I'm going to push in and push down in the same time, and that gets my ball bearings back in place. And if I use pressure to pinch this together, I won't run the risk of those popping out. So you can see in here, very simple. This is the first component. As our ignition goes through here, basically as our ignition goes down in there, this is the first one that has to line up first. So that's the one we have to. And if you wondered, this deal here, when you turn your ignition on and off and you hear it click, those ball bearings in there, there's different channels, and that's your different positions of, fork lock and ignition on and accessory. And so next is your actual electrical portion of the ignition, and it too lines up at some point with the second protrusions on this shaft. And again, it can only go one way, and because it just sits in there a certain depth, it lines up right about there, and that operates this part, and it does turn back and forth. And you can see when these things start stacking up and you're trying to put that shaft through there, that's how everything can get off and misaligned. All right guys, real quick and we'll get right back into your video. A lot of man hours, effort, and of course finances go into keeping this YouTube channel going strong. There is a way you can support us by becoming a patron member, link in the description below. Basically, you pledge a certain amount per piece of content, no risk to you because you can put a monthly cap. There are benefits such as t-shirts and stickers, access to the private Facebook group, it's a troll-free zone, access to our live video broadcast and chat, access to our premium videos up on request, and access to those ride and meetup events. All right, let's get back into your video. So what you want to do is put it back to factory since it was all off and we were having problems. So if this is the way it sits on the bike, this is the front of the bike, we want our ignition, we're going to put it back to factory, and so it would be this way, right? Because this would be 4 o'clock, this would be off, and this would be ignition on and then accessory. So we want to basically line everything up so this ignition is straightforward. Now I'm going to turn it around because we have to actually get inside it. All right, so if we want to get this lined up, this is the first component. We know it goes in like this, okay? So I would want to line that up. Again, be very careful, those are very spring loaded, and so hold down on this plate. But what I would do is put my ignition shaft in all the way because that's how it's going to sit. And if my ignition was off like it is, I know that it needs to sit straight forward. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it straight forward. So now I know that component is lined up and I can go ahead and slide that in. So again, now we know it's lined up because I can put my shaft in at least that part and the ignition is sitting straight forward. Of course, this ignition will go down a little bit more. All right, now that we've got that portion in, we're good to go. The second component here is the electrical component. We know it goes in just like so basically. So same thing, it's got a cutout on the top. It's very specific to the center nubs, so the second nubs on this shaft. So we want it to be straight. I would put it in and turn it counterclockwise or clockwise to get that lined up straight. I've already done it, so we know it's lined up. And the last component is the actual barrel that will go below the electrical portion here. It has a cutout too, and that directly correlates with the very end of the shaft, the last nubs on that shaft, and it too only goes in one way, so we want to make sure it's looking about straight. We can't adjust this once it's in there, the barrel spins, so we're pretty good there. But to get it on, it only goes one way in the bottom of the electrical component there, and then we start sliding this whole unit. It kind of goes in as, has to go in as one. So you can see I'm sliding it in there as one unit basically. And then I'm going to take my washer, and that goes in between right there. And if you need to push that washer back in there a little bit more, you can use a screwdriver there. So that's in now. You can see the barrel spins in there. So everything's lined up except that very last top of that barrel. We need to get that in there. And so there we go. And you can see in the bottom there, see that shaft is coming through. That's too deep. And the reason is because we don't have the spring up top yet. And so this is kind of allowed. Plus you could go too far. But basically in order to get that, the bottom nubs on that shaft to line up with the barrel, they are lined up because it's going through. If they weren't, we wouldn't be able to go. But we turn it, now we're lined up with it. But in order to be properly lined up, that we need to pull this out, and so those nubs, the shaft isn't really protruding into the barrel there, if that makes sense. So we very gently pull this out as everything's lined up. We get our spring back on the top there. And real quick, I just want to show you before we actually do that. If you don't know how the bottom of this works, is basically you can see, we'll turn it there. So there's metal that comes out there that actually grabs on to this track. This has a track on it basically, this collar right here. And so it clips into there, and especially in the 4 o'clock position there too. And that's how it kind of rides around on there and turns on there and doesn't fall off. And so when you're taking this off, you know, we turn it to the 4 o'clock position or whatever, you turn your key all the way counterclockwise, we push up on this button at the same time, and that basically locks that button up, and it locks that the metal right there that comes out to clip onto that track. So now that it's in that position, it kind of holds. So we bring our ignition back up, and we know everything's lined up. So now we can put our spring on, and we can put this back on. We're going to be real gentle so we don't get anything out of alignment. All right. And we know we're lined up with that barrel. We can, and again, we can push down too far. You can see it coming in there because it's got a spring on it. but we want to be right about there so that shaft is right at the top of the barrel, and you can kind of tell here, you know, right at kind of where that metal is, where the collar is, and we can turn our key. You heard it snap. Now our ignition is back on here, and we know at least everything's properly aligned. We do have some other components we need to put in here. Okay, so there is a specialty tool that you could try this to do this without taking the ignition all the way off. This is a ignition tool, and it's anywhere from $45 to $70. I know that's completely ridiculous. I got this one off Amazon. It had good reviews. I will link to it in the description below, and it works very well. So if you're interested, link description below. But basically, in a nutshell, is obviously we've got it lined up because we took it all apart. So we know it's lined up there in the off position, which is forward. If this was still on the bike, you can take one of these tools, ignition tools, Harley ignition tools. They only go one way, so I'm just turning it till there we go. So it's all the way in up against the collar there. And basically this is pointing forward, so we know we already know because I put this on, but it's in the off position. Of course we could turn it. Don't do this with this plate off and stuff if the rest of your components and spring are in. I'm just showing you this for demo, but obviously you can turn it to the 4 o'clock position, the off, without the ignition on, and then you can go over to the accessory. So, and that keeps everything basically aligned because it's going all the way through. Now, if you did you know, need to move it, or your ignition was off and you got out of position, obviously you can put this tool in and get it back to the 4 o'clock position. All right. Again, we don't have any of the other components in there, which is why I'm doing this. Or if you need to line up, if something was misaligned down here, or these were in line basically, and only this was out, which is the top portion, which is the clicking portion with the ball bearings, you can take this out. And you'll kind of get a feel for this because I know I can feel, you can see it came out basically of the electrical portion. So they say a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and you can feel it. And then we could turn this, and we're only turning this top portion in an attempt to get it to line up with this. And so you could do this all on the bike, and you'll know you got it lined up when this goes all the way in, and you can keep turning, pulling up and turning this in different positions to try to get it to back where you needed it. Of course, if that doesn't work, then I've shown you can tear this down and just do it manually. But I just wanted to be for you to be aware of this specialty tool. Could save you some time. So we'll continue on to put this back together. And the first thing is, of course, is our pin going back up in there. And I also need, if you remember, our very, very small component. This little guy with that very tiny spring, do not lose that. And it goes in like so. And I can actually push in on that. I'll just use the pin, push in and push up. And just keep your thumb over that in case that slips down. All right, and this is actually going to go up a little bit higher. We just work the barrel a little bit so I can get it up there. Again, this little spring goes up. It just sits in that little cup there. And if I can do this, I can line that spring. It's going through the spring and it's going through the metal part there behind it, and it goes straight to the back, and there's another cutout back there in the barrel. You'll see it, and so that basically sits nice and level in there. And so that is how, you can get a look at that, how that should look inside there. There we go, that is back to stock. And last is this little door, and it's just got that right on it. It hooks right around there. And again, I'm putting my thumb over this so I don't lose that little guy. And that just slides right down in there. And I'm just sliding that door and that little metal deal right down in there. You can see that tongue, that little metal tongue just slides down in there. Then that door sits back on there like so. And of course we've got our 2 little screws here. And we'll finish tightening these here with our Torx drive. All right, and that bad boy is aligned and ready to go back on the bike. We'll test it to see if it all works. This unit alone is $100 to $150 depending on how much of you get it. You can't just get the guts, it comes as one. Plus, we saved a ton of money. Don't have to pay a mechanic to do this. Don't get excited and start turning this ignition right now. Wait till it's on the bike. The reason is that goes down into, you know, a cutout basically, and it holds that pin in place on the neck. So just wait till you get on the bike before you start testing it. All right, we're gonna take our ignition, and I've already Set my 2 bolts on both sides in there with our washers. Set it into place there. And with our 5/32 hex head here, I'll start bolting this in. Moving on over to the other side here. Don't forget our little plug here, ignition plug, snaps right back up on there. All right, and I put my main fuse back in underneath my left side cover. And yes, we've got ignition, good. We've got accessory. And our bars are turned all the way to the left. I'll put the key in, push down and lock. That's the fork lock, and I'll try to move my bars. Yep, and they are locked. So fork lock position is working well. And we'll get it out of the fork lock position there. Turn our bars. Yep, good to go there. And again, this is how easy it should be to remove. Fork lock position, even if the bars are straight or fork lock, whatever. Key in, pushing up on the button underneath, turn to the left, and you see how easy that came off. The main thing is to stay out of troubles and getting this misaligned in there is not to turn it all when you're coming up. Just pull that straight out, nice and gentle in the fork lock position. Everything should stay aligned. Don't forget, you always have an ignition tool if you do have one of these that can help you fix. I've already went over that while the ignition was off, kind of how to use this tool that could align things. If you were in fork lock, you could stick this in and at least without an ignition unlock it so you could work on your bike if you didn't want it in fork lock. So this tool has multiple different purposes. And same thing when we're going back in, our spring goes up there okay. We want to make sure we go in, we know basically, and I'm gonna, as soon as I feel resistance, I'm gonna feel it, make sure it's lined up so I don't misalign anything. Straight back in and push down a little bit, turn the key. There we go, snapped into place, and our ignition is back on. All right, I'm gonna pop a couple videos on the screen for you. Check them out before you leave. Hopefully they're useful. Hopefully this video was useful. And if you appreciate it, there are ways you can support us. Links in the description below. By supporting us, you're helping us continue our mission to help as many bikers as we can worldwide. All right, peace, I'm out.